Welcome to week 4. Looking at triangles, rectangles, circles. We had a little bit of background with week 3, but what are we specifically referring to in week 4? Triangles. Whether you're looking at triangles as they actually occur in the composition or as underlying compositions, this is what we want to do right now. Is there an underlying triangle in this photograph, or is this a photograph about triangles? If we look, we see many triangles that occur within the photograph. We even have implied triangles if we understand the Gestalt principles. There's an implied triangle here. There's an implied triangle here, and in the shapes that occur from the shadows and the light play. Looking at this photograph, we would say that this is about triangles, but there's also underlying structures that tie this image together based on the compositional idea of a triangle. When you're composing, pay very close attention to the corners, what's happening in the corners of your images. When we put something in a photograph that's on an angle that doesn't work with the horizontal or is not parallel to the horizontal or the vertical edges, be aware of how that affects the energy or the actual photograph in terms of balance. In this image, we see a circle of sky, an implied circle, or is this about a circle? Take a look at Edward Weston. Try to get an actual book. Go to the library, go to a bookstore, and look at a copy of his work because it's much better than looking at images online. But in this photograph, we see an implied circle. Is this composition based on the circle? Not necessarily, but there is a circle with leading lines. There are triangles. There are horizontals. There are implied lines. There's a lot of directional movement with this photograph. Again, we're looking at golden triangles. What happens in each of these spaces as underlying structures themselves. There's a triangle here and here and here and here, and then the points of interest. This photograph has a lot going on, but it can be very much easily divided up according to the golden triangles with a lot of information going on in each of these spaces. There's much information in here, and there's much information in the center of interest here with the main subject. There's a lot of information going on in this particular triangle, not as much with this one, excuse me, but a lot of textures. On these points of interest, something is happening. There's a face under this circle, a hand, another hand, and probably a sign under this. They are points of interest that direct the viewer's gaze and control us in a way that the photographer commands us to do. There's an implied leading line with this photograph, understanding again the Gestalt principles, the line of emergence and lines of continuation. So we understand that this path has been taken by the subjects who are going to continue to work and go out of the image. Understand styles and history in its development of photography. Pictorialism predated critical sharp focus. Pictorialism was very much about soft imagery and the fuzzy nature of a photograph. Critical sharp focus is what it is. It's defined as being f16, 22, 64. You will see a group f64 who use that aperture to gain critical focus. Now, a critical focus is not always guaranteed by small apertures throughout an image in digital photography. That's kind of a complicated concept that you'll learn later in your photographic career, but f16 is really sharp, but in overall sharpness in digital, sometimes it can get a little edgy and a little bit of fuzziness, but in terms of depth of field, it will give you great focus for those many planes within an image. But be aware of those two styles, pictorialism and sharp focus. And in today's digital world and availability of Photoshop and post-production, a lot of this, all these different styles are coming into play, and they have a place for everything. Be aware of what a telephoto lens does in terms of its shallow depth of field and how a wide-angle lens has sharper definition but can have some distortion on the edges, and you can use that to your creative abilities and your style. This is a photograph from Willard Van Dyke from Group F64. Please look up Group F64 and see what their photographs were all about. Very clean, very critical, very sharp, very detailed. We're also going to talk about in this week blur and motion. What happens with that and how do we control it to control the view? At first glance, this particular photograph might appear to be a really bad image. Yes, it would be bad for a work for a for a newspaper or for a magazine, because we really can't see what's going on. In terms of a creative night image, it might be a little more acceptable because we see some examples of a little bit of light painting, some trails created with the movement of the camera. So each has its place. Is this a really good photograph? You be the judge. We have motion, we have implied movement because of the peripheral motion of the dancers on the edges. The figures in the center have come to a stop, and we understand that there's a great deal of movement. It's almost like a circular pattern of movement around the couple in the center. Use motion and use blur creatively. There's an implied idea of motion within this photograph as we see the trail of lights captured through an extended exposure from the car that traveled through the photograph. Does this add to your photograph or does it detract from the image? It depends upon the intent you have for your photograph. There are always certain moments that you have to be available, aware, and intuitive about as a strong photographer. Have your camera with you. Be a good study of people and what's happening. Be a people watcher. Understand the sport that you want to photograph. Anticipate the action. Capture the moment. Is this photoshopped? No. Actually, this person captured this individual as they went into the air and the cloud happened to be there. So is this a strong photo? You be the judge. Moment and timing is always very, very important. When you're shooting with a 50mm lens on a 35mm digital camera, it's giving you what your eyes see. A lot of people think they have to have multiple lenses, and the largest telephoto lens that exists or the widest wide angle that exists, and they forget about the lowly little 50mm. The 50mm lens is a wonderful tool to use, especially a fast lens, a 1.4. It's a wonderful thing to have in your arsenal of equipment, or if you're just starting out and you want to purchase a really good lens, get that 50mm lens. It will serve you well. Be prepared for the moment. Exposure. The eye is naturally drawn to areas that are properly exposed. We're also drawn to darker areas. Lens flare and some silhouetting can happen with particular lenses, and do they take away from the image? It depends on the client. It depends on your own artistic needs. What's happening in this particular photograph and what are you drawn to? And I think we're drawn immediately to that quality of light that dances on the surface of this building. Look for, when you're searching for things to photograph, look for patterns that happen. Look for light. Look for a mood that's created in unexpected places. You might look out of your window and find something that's happening just based on the lines, the shapes, the colors, the values, and the textures. What's happening with lines and shadows. Learn to see to learn to photograph. Implied triangles? Yes. Where's the implied triangle? If we look at the tops of the subject's heads, there's almost like an implied triangle that occurs if you can follow the cursor. So we're leading from point down to the tip of the triangle, triangle point, triangle point. Circular patterns. What should you know in week 4? Assignment 4, ask again that you shoot 36 images, post 18 to your Flickr page, submit 4 to the group pool that tells the instructor what you learned in week 4. Do you want to explore focus, depth of field? Do you want to explore motion? Do you want to understand those triangular or circular or oval compositions that underlie a image? You get to decide on the subject matter and just demonstrate what you have gained from this particular photograph. Think about week 1 when we introduced concepts of contrast, happy, sad, moods. You can always go back to that if you're struggling on what to photograph. So again, we're looking for perhaps focus, depth of field, motion. Learn to control the viewer and the viewer's idea of what's happening in that image through composition. You're the photographer, you're the artist. Have a good week.